Have you ever imagined being told you don't belong, even when you've worked your whole life to earn your place? It happened to Dr. Marcus Reed, a black CEO sitting in first class moments before takeoff on a flight from New York to Zurich. A man who built companies, led thousands, and carried himself with quiet grace. Yet, that morning, none of it mattered. A flight attendant walked up, eyes cold, voice sharp. "Sir, we need you to give up your seat for another passenger." The other passenger, a wealthy white businessman who smiled as if the world had already decided who deserved comfort and who didn't. Now imagine, it's you. You're sitting there, humiliated, with everyone watching whispers, stares, silence. Would you stay calm? Would you fight back? Or would you walk away, carrying the weight of every unspoken prejudice that's ever followed you? But here's the twist. 5 minutes later, that same crew would learn who they had asked to move. And nothing, not the company, not the flight, not the world they knew, would ever be the same again. Because this isn't just a story about humiliation, it's about dignity, power, and what happens when the quiet man in seat 1A decides to stand up not for himself, but for everyone who's ever been told to step aside. Stay with me. This story will make you rethink power, empathy, and what true leadership looks like. If you believe respect should never have a color hit, like, share, and subscribe. Now, let's begin. The first light of dawn brushed across the glass walls of San Francisco International Airport, painting streaks of gold over a city that never truly slept. The concourse hummed softly, rolling suitcases, distant boarding calls, the hiss of espresso machines. Amid the gentle chaos sat a man who seemed to exist slightly apart from it all. Dr. Marcus Reed adjusted the cuffs of his charcoal sweater and took another sip of his black coffee. No sugar, no cream, the same way he preferred his mornings, clear, unembellished, and efficient. He was 45 years old, tall, calm, and composed in a way that drew attention even when he tried to avoid it. His eyes carried the quiet weight of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything. To most people who passed by, Marcus looked like another business traveler heading somewhere important. Few would guess that he was the founder and CEO of Helix Dynamics, one of the most innovative technology firms in the country. Helix specialized in predictive logistics and automation system software so advanced it powered several of the world's largest shipping companies. And yet, Marcus had never been one for publicity. He preferred control to fame, precision to spotlight. Today's trip, however, was different. He wasn't flying to attend a conference or give a speech. He was flying to finalize the acquisition of Trans-Aero Group, a European aviation conglomerate valued in the billions. The deal had been in the works for 2 years, and when completed, it would give Helix direct ownership of multiple airlines across the Atlantic. To Marcus, this wasn't just business, it was legacy. Still, he treated the morning like any other, deliberate, grounded. He woke before sunrise, brewed his coffee, checked his inbox, then took the quiet drive to the airport in his electric sedan. His driver, a longtime employee named Ray, had offered to wait at the terminal. Marcus politely declined. "I'll be fine. Ray, it's just another flight." Ray smiled knowingly. "For most people, maybe. For you, sir, it's history." Marcus chuckled softly. "History can wait. Flights don't." Inside the terminal, he moved with the ease of routine. He had no entourage, no assistant trailing behind him. Only a leather briefcase worn but immaculate, and the steady rhythm of a man who understood both the power and the burden of quiet authority. As he reached the Helix Executive Lounge, the automatic glass doors opened with a whisper. Inside, the world changed. The noise of the terminal faded into soft jazz. The smell of coffee and citrus polish filled the air, and light from the high windows shimmered over marble floors. A hostess at the desk greeted him with the kind of bright professionalism trained into perfection. "Good morning, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Marcus handed it over with a polite smile. She scanned it, eyes flickering briefly to the name. There was a half-second of hesitation, the kind that most would miss, but Marcus noticed. "Oh, Dr. Reed. Welcome back. Your flight to London departs in 40 minutes. Please, enjoy the lounge." He nodded. "Thank you." He'd seen that pause before, that quiet flicker of surprise that came when people realized the man before them, a black man in a simple sweater, wasn't staff, wasn't lost, wasn't waiting for someone else. He was the guest, the passenger, the one at the top of the list. It didn't bother him anymore, not in the sharp way it used to, but he still noticed. Every time. He found a seat near the window overlooking the tarmac. Outside, dawn had brightened into a pale gold, washing over the tails of parked aircraft lined like soldiers. The Trans-Aero insignia, bold and proud, gleamed on several of them, a stylized silver wing over navy blue. Marcus smiled faintly. In less than 24 hours, that logo would belong to him. He powered on his tablet, reviewing the final acquisition documents. Pages of numbers, legal jargon, and signatures filled the screen. Each detail was precise, each clause intentional. He'd spent years building this, not just a company, but a philosophy that order and empathy could coexist, that technology could make systems more human, not less. As he scrolled, his phone buzzed gently. A message from Natalie Brooks, his chief operating officer. "Natalie, London team, ready, hotel secured, press holding statement drafted. Marcus good. Let's keep it quiet until I arrive." Natalie understood. Smooth flight, boss. He smiled. Natalie had been with him since the beginning. Loyal, brilliant, fiercely ethical. She knew better than to wish him luck. Marcus didn't believe in luck, only in preparation. A few seats away, a pair of younger businessmen whispered animatedly over their laptops. One of them glanced at Marcus, then leaned toward his colleague. The other nodded, whispering something Marcus couldn't hear. Then both of them looked away. It wasn't malice, just that familiar cocktail of curiosity and assumption, the quiet disbelief that a man like him could be who he was. He took another slow sip of coffee. It no longer stung. It was simply part of the background noise of success. Through the glass, a Trans-Aero A350 rolled into position at Gate 12. Sleek, white, immaculate, a marvel of engineering and efficiency. A voice echoed softly through the lounge speakers. "Now boarding Trans-Aero Flight 407 to London. Heathrow. First-class passengers may proceed to Gate 12. Marcus powered down his tablet and slipped it into his briefcase. He rose from his seat, adjusted his jacket, and gave the hostess at the desk a nod of thanks as he passed. The short walk to the gate was unhurried. Around him, other passengers rushed, briefcases swinging, phones pressed to ears, boarding passes clutched tightly like lifelines. Marcus moved slower, steadier, as if time itself bent to his pace. At the gate, a young agent smiled brightly. "Good morning, Sir, boarding pass, please. He handed it over. She scanned it, then looked up, startled by the screen's alert tone. Oh, you're in first class suite 1A. Dr. Reed, welcome aboard. Her voice softened on the name, a subtle shift respect catching up with realization. Marcus offered a gentle smile. Thank you. Looking forward to the flight. As he stepped through the jet bridge, the hum of the airport faded behind him. The air smelled faintly of new leather and jet fuel, a familiar combination that always meant motion, progress, the next step forward. For a brief moment, Marcus closed his eyes and let the rhythm of the engines wash over him. Tomorrow, when this plane landed, the deal would close. Tomorrow, he would own Trans-Aero Airlines. He didn't know yet that before the next sunrise, that same airline and everyone who thought they understood power was about to learn what it really meant. The boarding area for Trans-Aero Flight 407 glowed under the soft morning lights. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, framing a view of the aircraft outside a sleek white A350 glistening like a blade under the California sun. Passengers began to gather near the VIP entrance, a quiet mix of business travelers and high-status members who moved with the self-assured rhythm of people used to being first in line. Marcus stood a few steps away, unhurried as always, his expression calm, his breathing steady. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee and jet fuel. A boarding agent called out with a practiced smile, "First-class passengers for Flight 407 to London. We're ready to board." Marcus scanned his boarding pass and offered a polite nod. "Thank you." He stepped into the jet bridge, the sound of his shoes echoing softly against the metal floor. Inside the aircraft, the lighting shifted to a warm gold hue, designed to ease passengers into the serenity of luxury. The first-class cabin was quiet, intimate. Only 8 suites, each with sliding doors, champagne glasses, and ambient lighting that could almost make you forget you were 35,000 feet above the ground. Marcus placed his briefcase in the overhead compartment, sat down at seat 1A, and exhaled slowly. The seat molded around him like a glove. The texture of the leather was cool under his fingertips. He opened his laptop, intending to review the final contract draft one more time before takeoff. For a moment, the world was still. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, I believe there's been a mistake." Marcus looked up. Standing beside him was a man in his late 50s. Silver hair, sharp suit, the confident smile of someone used to get in his way. "My seat is 1A, the man said. "There must be some mix-up." Marcus blinked, calm. "I'm afraid this is my seat." The man chuckled lightly. "I don't think so. I'm Gregory Vance, Platinum Elite for 25 years. I always fly 1A on this route." Before Marcus could reply, a tall flight attendant approached. Her name tag read Linda Harper Flight Purser, her posture crisp, her tone firm. "Sir, is there a problem?" she asked Gregory. "Yes. Apparently, this gentleman took my seat." Linda turned toward Marcus. "May I see your boarding pass?" "Please." Marcus handed it to her. She scanned it, her eyes flicking between the ticket and his face. A small crease formed between her brows, the kind that appeared when someone's assumptions didn't match the data in front of them. "It says 1A, she murmured, clearly uncertain. "That's correct," Marcus said quietly. Linda hesitated, then looked at Gregory. "Mr. Vance, can I check your ticket as well?" Gregory waved his phone confidently. "1 Alpha, same as always." She scanned his code, frowned again, Then her eyes softened toward Gregory, and something in her tone changed. "Mr. Vance, you're a valued platinum guest. Let me see what I can do to fix this." Marcus watched the shift, subtle but unmistakable, the practiced smile toward the privileged customer, the polite but distant tone toward the one who didn't fit the expectation. "Fix what? Exactly?" Marcus asked, his voice even, but lower now. Linda offered a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, sometimes there are duplicate assignments. Would you mind moving to another seat while we sort this out?" Marcus tilted his head slightly. "I paid for this suite, in full, days ago." "I understand, sir. But Mr. Vance is a frequent flyer. He's part of our premium loyalty program, and we—" Marcus interrupted softly. "And I am not," Linda froze for half a second. Gregory folded his arms, smirking. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's not make this complicated. I've been flying this airline longer than he's been buying tickets." Linda glanced nervously between them. "Sir, please lower your voice." Marcus's voice, however, stayed calm. "I haven't raised it." The silence stretched. Passengers in the nearby suites began to peek over the partitions. One of them muttered something under his breath, something that sounded like, "Here we go." Linda sighed quietly, then leaned closer to Marcus. Her tone turned polite but firm, the tone of finality used when service protocol ran out of patience. "Sir, if you could please gather your belongings, we'll reassign you to another first-class seat. It's just a misunderstanding." Marcus stared at her for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then, without a word, he closed his laptop. He placed it carefully into his bag, stood, and looked her in the eye. "I hope it is just that," he said. Linda exhaled, visibly relieved. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your understanding." Gregory stepped into the suite, beaming. "Good man. Appreciate it. Enjoy the flight. Buddy." The word buddy lingered in the air like a mosquito buzz. Marcus didn't respond. He walked down the aisle, the low hum of the engines beginning to rise as the plane prepared for pushback. Passengers watched, some pretending not to. A young flight attendant, Emily Nguyen, looked up from the galley as Marcus passed. Her eyes were warm, uncertain, apologetic. She whispered, "Sir, that wasn't right." Marcus offered a faint smile. "I know, but sometimes it's better to let people show you who they are." He continued to the back, where an empty seat waited near the restrooms. It smelled faintly of disinfectant and coffee grounds. He sat down, straightened his jacket, and looked out the window. The tarmac lights flickered like stars scattered beneath him. Inside, his pulse remained steady. Years of boardroom wars and quiet prejudice had trained him well. He knew anger was easy, power was silent. From the front of the cabin, faint laughter drifted back Gregory's voice, loud and satisfied, Linda's lighter tone joining in. Marcus leaned back against the headrest and closed his eyes. He thought of his mother, a nurse who once told him that dignity was something no one could take, only something you could hand over. He wasn't about to hand over his. Minutes passed. The plane began its taxi toward the runway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, smooth and calm. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Transaero Flight 407 to London Heathrow. Estimated flight time 10 hours and 15 minutes. Please take your seats and prepare for departure." As the engines roared to life, Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone, a custom Helix Dynamics prototype, encrypted and offline. He opened a single app labeled Horizon. The screen glowed faint blue. Beneath it, a single phrase emergency protocol, executive authorization required. He hovered his thumb over the confirmation circle for a moment, thinking, in his mind. A quiet voice whispered not anger, not vengeance, just calm precision. They think power is a seat. They're about to learn it isn't. Marcus pressed confirm. The phone vibrated once, then went dark. He placed it face down on the tray and exhaled through his nose. The aircraft lifted from the ground, climbing steadily into the gray morning sky, somewhere in New York, inside the Helix Dynamics Command Center. A notification appeared on Natalie Brooks's screen. Her heart skipped. The alert read Project Horizon activated, red protocol. She stared at it, then whispered, "Oh, God, Marcus, what are you doing?" She picked up the phone, hesitated, and then dialed back on the plane. Marcus's phone buzzed once, briefly. He looked at the name, Natalie Brooks. He didn't answer. Outside, sunlight burst through the clouds, flooding the cabin in gold. Marcus opened his eyes and looked out the window. His reflection stared back at him calm, composed, unshaken. He whispered to himself, barely audible, "This isn't about revenge, it's about reminder." And with that, the story of Flight 407 truly began. The engines hummed with a low, steady rhythm as Flight 407 sliced through a patch of early morning clouds. Inside the cabin, the lights dimmed to a soft amber. It was supposed to be peaceful. For most passengers, it was. For one man sitting near the back of the aircraft, peace had become a performance. Dr. Marcus Reed sat in Seat 38C, the kind of seat reserved for travelers who booked last minute or those who simply could not afford more. It smelled faintly of coffee and industrial cleaner. The armrest was scratched, the headrest stiff, a place he had not sat in for over 20 years. He leaned back, eyes closed, feeling the vibration of the jet engines under his shoes. He could hear muffled conversation from the front of the plane, laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of comfort he had paid for but was denied. He could picture Gregory Vance reclining in the suite that once bore his ticket, sipping champagne he hadn't earned, wearing the same smug smile that had followed Marcus down the aisle. But Marcus did not allow himself anger. Not yet. His mother used to tell him, "When you get angry, they see your fire. When you stay calm, they feel your storm." He chose the storm. A few rows away, Emily Nguyen, the young flight attendant, quietly approached him. She crouched slightly to speak in a voice that carried no authority, only empathy. "Sir, can I bring you anything? Maybe some water or coffee?" Marcus looked up, his tone gentle. "Thank you. Emily, I'm fine." Her brows knit together. "I'm sorry about what happened earlier. I wanted to say something, but," he raised a hand slightly, "you don't owe me an explanation. You did what you could." Emily hesitated, then whispered, "That's not how we're trained to treat people. I'm really sorry." Marcus gave a small smile that was both kind and tired. Sometimes people forget who's watching when they think no one important is. Her eyes softened. She nodded, then walked away, the weight of guilt visible in her posture. Marcus turned back toward the window. The Pacific stretched endlessly below, a silver-blue sheet beneath the rising sun. His reflection floated against the glass calm, unreadable. He reached into his jacket pocket and touched the phone again. It remained dark. Project Horizon was already in motion. The gears of an empire were turning silently on the ground while 35,000 feet above. No one yet understood what was happening. He thought about Natalie Brooks back in New York. She would have seen the alert. She would have understood. She was probably pacing her office right now, trying to calculate what he planned to do. Marcus knew her well. She would not stop him. She trusted that he never acted from emotion, only from purpose. He looked around the cabin. An older woman sat beside him, reading a paperback novel. A young man across the aisle scrolled through his phone. Life, in all its quiet ordinariness, continued. None of them knew that within hours, the very airline carrying them would belong to the man sitting among them, the one who had been asked to give up his seat. The irony wasn't lost on him. Life had a taste for dramatic symmetry. From the front of the plane, the curtain to first class rustled. Linda Harper, the purser, stepped through, her posture as straight as a ruler. She scanned the cabin, checking passengers. When her eyes found Marcus, her lips tightened for a fraction of a second before smoothing back into a professional smile. She approached him slowly, as though hoping he might not notice. "Dr. Reed, I just wanted to make sure you were comfortable back here." Marcus looked up, calm, "Perfectly fine, thank you." She hesitated. "I'm very sorry about earlier. The system sometimes assigns duplicate seats. It wasn't personal." He met her gaze evenly. "No, Ms. Harper, it rarely is." Something in his tone, measured, polite, but sharp as glass, made her blink. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "Enjoy the flight, sir." He nodded. "I intend to," when she turned and walked away. Marcus allowed himself a quiet exhale. It wasn't satisfaction. It was restraint. He had built an empire on composure, and today would test that more than ever. He reached for the in-flight magazine, flipped through a few pages without reading. The mindless photos of beaches and cities blurred before his eyes. He wasn't seeing them. He was seeing data contracts, corporate charts, acquisition clauses, and behind all that, the image of people like Linda, like Gregory, operating under a belief so old it had become invisible. He wondered how many moments like this had gone unseen, how many small humiliations were endured daily by people who could not respond. He thought of his father, a postal worker who once came home with blood on his knuckles after a co-worker mocked his accent. The man was never punished. His father never told the manager. Some battles, son, his father had said, are won by living well enough that they have to see you rise. Marcus had lived by that rule, but sometimes living well wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to make the system itself remember who it served. The captain's voice broke through the hum. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude. You may now use electronic devices. Breakfast will be served shortly." Marcus powered on his laptop again, but not for emails. He opened a secure document labeled Helix Holdings, Confidential. Lines of code and authorization signatures scrolled across the screen. The final acquisition sequence had begun processing. He typed a short message on the encrypted channel. "Natalie, confirm final wire. Initiate transfer of operational control upon landing." A minute later, her reply appeared, confirmed. Transfer in progress. Estimated completion, 6 hours, 45 minutes. He sat back. The engine's hum was almost meditative. Up front. Linda poured Gregory another glass of champagne. Gregory laughed loudly, gesturing animatedly as if recounting some story of victory. Marcus watched them from afar, detached, like a scientist observing behavior through glass. Emily walked by again, discreetly placing a bottle of water on his tray. She gave a small nod. He returned it, a silent acknowledgement between two people who still remembered decency. Time passed slowly, marked by the rhythmic thud of turbulence and the occasional ding of the seatbelt sign. Marcus rested his eyes. Sleep didn't come, but reflection did. He thought about what awaited him in London, the press, the signatures, the headlines. None of them would know what had happened on this plane. But that wasn't the point. The point wasn't humiliation or revenge. It was revelation. He wanted them, the airline, the employees, the executives, to see what prejudice looked like from above the clouds, to understand that arrogance built on ignorance was still weakness. As he sat there, the steward came by with breakfast trays. Marcus accepted his politely. The eggs were rubbery, the coffee lukewarm, but he ate without complaint. Near the end of the meal service, the intercom chimed. Cabin crew, prepare for turbulence. The plane trembled gently. The cabin lights flickered. A few passengers gasped. Marcus stayed still, his hand resting lightly on the table. He had weathered storms far worse than this. When the shaking stopped, he glanced at his screen. The progress bar on the transaction now read 42% complete. Outside, clouds thinned, revealing the vast blue of the upper atmosphere. The horizon curved gently, golden against the light. Marcus watched it for a long time, his reflection blending with the sky. He whispered quietly, "We rise anyway." It wasn't a declaration. It was a reminder. Behind him, passengers returned to their conversations. Up front, Gregory asked for another drink. But somewhere between San Francisco and London, power had already shifted hands. No one knew it yet. But the airline they served, the company they trusted, now had a new owner, the man in Seat 38C. And when they landed, the world would start to notice. The cabin had settled into quiet rhythm. The hum of the engines blended with the soft rustle of pages and the occasional click of a seatbelt buckle. A few hours into the flight, most passengers were dozing or watching movies. The world outside was pure silver and white, endless clouds rolling beneath them like frozen waves. In the back of the plane, Dr. Marcus Reed sat motionless. His laptop screen glowed faintly in the dimmed light. The final sequence of the corporate transfer was almost halfway complete. He could see it on the screen, line by line, authorization by authorization, as the ownership of TransAero shifted in real time. He leaned back and rubbed his temples. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers, who had faced entire boards trying to unseat him, this should have been just another transaction. But it wasn't. This one had a pulse. It was personal. His phone buzzed softly against his tray table. He turned it over. It was a message from Natalie Brooks. "Marcus, we confirm the wire. You now control 51% of TransAero Holdings. Are you sure you want to proceed with Red Protocol before landing?" He stared at the message for a moment, then typed back slowly. "Yes, proceed exactly as instructed. All directives to execute upon arrival. Notify Global Operations to prepare Zurich Command for immediate contact." Then, after a pause, he added, "No publicity. This stays internal until I say otherwise." He hit send. The phone went dark again. He took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, the sound almost blending with the hum of the cabin. Around him, the world went on, oblivious. He looked out the window. The Atlantic stretched endlessly below, calm and cruel at the same time. For a long moment, Marcus let his mind wander not to strategy or contracts, but to memory. He thought of his father again, that same quiet dignity that never bowed. He thought of his mother's soft voice when she told him that strength didn't need to be loud. He thought of the long road that had brought him here, to a seat he didn't belong in, and to a world that still sometimes pretended not to see him. Then, softly, almost to himself, he said, "Let them see now." A small light blinked on his phone message received. Natalie again. Understood. Condition read is active, somewhere on the ground. A quiet storm had begun. In the first-class cabin, Gregory Vance laughed too loudly at his own joke. The purser, Linda Harper, smiled with professional politeness, though there was a trace of something smug in her tone now. She had won what she thought was a battle of order. She'd kept the flight on time, the premium customer happy, and her own sense of authority intact. Gregory lifted his glass of champagne. "Now, this is how you start a trip," he said. "No drama, no nonsense." Linda smiled faintly. "We always try to ensure our most loyal guests are comfortable, Mr. Vance." He nodded, satisfied. "You handled that mix-up like a pro. Some people just make things more complicated than they need to be." Linda's lips twitched upward. "You can't please everyone." From the galley. Emily Nguyen overheard their conversation. Her hands tightened around the tray she was holding. She looked down, then took a deep breath and forced herself to continue serving passengers in the front rows. Her mind replayed the image of Marcus being asked to move the look on his face. Calm, but unyielding. The kind of calm that held power. Emily had only been flying for 3 years, but she had seen enough to know that the quiet passengers were often the ones worth listening to, and something told her that man wasn't just anyone. She turned toward the back again, glancing down the aisle. He was still there, sitting straight, reading, no anger, no visible frustration, just a man who had decided to wait. She couldn't know that in that exact moment. The airline she worked for had a new owner. 6 hours later, the plane crossed into European airspace. The cabin lights glowed softly as flight attendants began preparing for breakfast service. Linda walked through the aisles, checking passengers, her tone brisk and efficient. When she reached the back again, she saw Marcus still awake. He looked up from his screen and met her eyes. Something in his gaze unsettled her. Not anger, something colder, more certain. "Coffee, sir?" she asked, trying to sound casual. Marcus smiled politely. "No, thank you." Linda hesitated, then decided to break the silence. "You're taking this very well. Most passengers would have demanded to speak with corporate by now." "I'm not most passengers," he said quietly. She gave a small, nervous laugh. "I can see that." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "You know what's interesting? Ms. Harper systems always show you who they really serve. You think they protect you, but they protect the people who built them." She blinked, unsure how to respond. "I suppose that's true." He nodded once, still calm. "Then I suppose we're about to find out who really built this one." Before she could ask what he meant, a light pinged on her service tablet. She frowned, checking the message. It was from Operations A Priority Alert. Her expression shifted from confusion to unease as she read. "Ms. Harper, please prepare for arrival at London Heathrow. Additional company personnel will meet Flight 407 upon landing. Maintain full professionalism. No details to passengers. Her pulse quickened. That was unusual, very unusual. She looked at Marcus again, who now seemed entirely at peace, almost serene. In New York, Natalie Brooks stood in the glass office of Helix Dynamics, watching the city lights flicker far below. Her phone buzzed again, a call from London headquarters of Transaero. She answered quickly. "This is Brooks. Ms. Brooks, we've received confirmation. The new ownership has been recorded in the London Exchange System. Dr. Reed is now the majority shareholder." "Good," she said simply. "Execute red protocol." The man on the other end hesitated. "You're sure that includes executive override authority, exactly as Dr. Reed ordered?" "Yes, ma'am." She hung up and closed her eyes for a moment. There was a kind of beauty in the precision of it all. Marcus didn't raise his voice, didn't call for revenge. He used the system they respected so blindly, money, control, hierarchy, and turned it inward, like a mirror. The descent began. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our approach to London Heathrow. Local time is 6 to 12 a.m. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." Marcus closed his laptop and slid it into his briefcase. The deal was done. The message sent. He looked out the window one last time before they broke through the clouds. The city below shimmered faintly under morning fog. Lights scattered like embers. Emily passed by one final time, checking that trays were stowed. She stopped by Marcus's seat, voice quiet. "Thank you for being patient, sir. I hope the rest of your flight was okay." He gave her a small, genuine smile. "You've been kind, Emily. I won't forget that." She smiled back, though she didn't understand what he meant. The plane touched down with a smooth thud. Applause broke out from a few passengers, a habit Marcus never understood. As they taxied toward the gate, he straightened his tie and adjusted his jacket. Calm, deliberate. Linda was already at the front, ready to greet passengers as they disembarked. She smiled mechanically, unaware that in less than 15 minutes, everything she knew about her career was about to collapse. Marcus waited until the aisle cleared. Then he stood, collected his briefcase, and began walking forward. Heads turned as he passed. Some passengers recognized him from business magazines. Others simply felt something different about the way he moved, composed, unbothered, in control. When he reached the front, Linda offered her usual farewell. "Thank you for flying with Transaero, Dr. Reed. I hope we see you again soon." He paused, meeting her eyes. "You will." She smiled, not realizing the weight of those words. The door opened. Sunlight spilled into the cabin. A group of men in dark suits waited just outside corporate security and senior executives from Transaero. Their faces were pale, their expressions tense. Marcus stepped onto the jet bridge, the echo of his footsteps steady and slow. Behind him, the crew exchanged uneasy glances. The morning light felt clean, cold, and final. The storm had arrived. The jet bridge at London Heathrow was filled with the soft shuffle of footsteps and the murmur of tired travelers. The morning air that drifted through the open door was crisp and damp, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and rain. Dr. Marcus Reed stood just inside the aircraft doorway, waiting for the line of passengers to clear. His movements were unhurried. His mind, however, was already miles ahead. Outside, near the gate, A group of executives in dark suits waited, whispering urgently into their earpieces. At the center of the group stood Alan Briggs, the CEO of Trans-Aero Group, the man who, until less than an hour ago, had been Marcus's counterpart in negotiations. Alan looked uneasy, his posture stiff, his face pale. He had received the news mid-flight. The acquisition had been finalized. Helix Dynamics was now the majority owner, and the man he had heard stories about, the silent, analytical genius, was standing right there on his own plane. Marcus adjusted his jacket and stepped out of the doorway. Each footstep echoed softly against the steel walkway. Behind him, the crew gathered near the galley, whispering, unaware of what waited at the end of that bridge. As Marcus walked toward the terminal, the first flash of camera lights burst. Reporters hadn't been told why the executives were gathered there, but they knew something big was happening. Alan stepped forward, hand half raised in greeting. "Dr. Reed," he said, voice tight with forced politeness. "I didn't realize you'd be traveling on our flight today." Marcus's tone was calm, almost kind. "I like to see things from the ground level. Alan, it helps me understand the people I'm investing in." Alan swallowed hard. I'm sure the flight was comfortable. Marcus looked at him, and for a moment, there was silence. Then came the smallest hint of a smile. Let's just say it was revealing. Alan's jaw tensed. He could feel the reporter's eyes burning holes in his suit. "Perhaps we can discuss this privately," he muttered. Marcus nodded. "Of course. But first, there's something we need to address." He turned slightly, signaling to one of the Helix representatives who had arrived ahead of him. The man handed him a folder marked with the Helix seal. Marcus took it, opened it, and began to walk back toward the jet bridge. Inside the plane, Linda Harper was finishing her final checks. Her voice was crisp as she reminded the crew to prepare for deboarding. She hadn't noticed that several security officers and Trans-Aero executives had stepped quietly onto the bridge behind Marcus. The moment he reappeared, the cabin fell silent. Linda turned. Surprised, "Dr. Reed, is something wrong?" He stopped in the aisle, the soft light from the open door reflecting off his face. "No, Ms. Harper, nothing's wrong, but I believe there's something we need to make right." She blinked, confused. "I don't understand." Marcus handed the folder to one of the uniformed men. The officer stepped forward and spoke with careful formality. "Ms. Linda Harper, by order of the new executive management of Trans-Aero Group, you and the senior cabin officer, Tom Jensen, are hereby relieved of duty, effective immediately." The words hit like thunder. Linda stared, her lips parting. What are you talking about?" Tom stepped from the galley, his expression frozen. "This is ridiculous." On what grounds Marcus met his eyes? On the grounds of conduct unbecoming of representatives of this airline. What happened on this flight is unacceptable, and it ends today. The other passengers had stopped moving, their curiosity transforming into quiet disbelief. Some pulled out their phones, recording. Linda's voice trembled now. "The authority gone. I don't know what this is, but I've worked here for 17 years. You can't just walk in," and Alan Briggs stepped forward. His voice tired. "Linda, it's true. The company changed ownership this morning. Dr. Reed is now the majority shareholder." The color drained from her face. What Marcus's tone was steady, not angry, not triumphant, just absolute. "Ms. Harper, when you asked me to leave my seat, You didn't just disrespect a passenger. You disrespected a principle. You judged a man's worth before you even knew his name. He looked around the cabin at Gregory, who sat frozen in his luxury seat, his drink untouched. You saw status, Marcus said quietly. I saw character, and today, character wins. Gregory finally found his voice. Look, this is getting out of hand. She was just doing her job. Nobody got hurt. Marcus turned to him. You're right, Mr. Vance. Nobody got hurt, but some things wound deeper than injury. Some wounds you carry quietly because the world has taught you to, but I don't carry them anymore. He let that sit in the air for a long moment. Even the engines outside seemed to hush. Linda opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her eyes darted between Marcus and Alan. Alan's voice was low but final. Ms. Harper, please step off the aircraft. Your supervisor will debrief you. Tom muttered something under his breath as he followed her. Emily stood near the galley, silent, her hands trembling slightly. When the two senior crew members were escorted out, Marcus turned to her. Emily, thank you for your professionalism. She swallowed hard, her voice soft. I didn't do much, sir. You did enough, he said. You showed decency when it was inconvenient. That matters more than you think. Her eyes glistened. She nodded. Marcus looked back toward the rest of the passengers. Some were whispering. Others just watched him in quiet awe. He adjusted his jacket. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption. I hope your next flight with Transaero is better than mine. There was a faint ripple of awkward laughter, but also respect the kind of respect that doesn't come from fear, but from witnessing truth. Marcus walked down the aisle one last time, the sound of his shoes sharp and certain. As he stepped off the plane, cameras flashed again. Alan followed him, still looking shaken. One reporter shouted over the noise, Doctor, Reed, is it true you now own Transaero? Marcus paused just long enough to answer. It's true. Then why fire the crew? Another asked. Marcus looked directly into the cameras, because integrity flies higher than any airplane. And then he turned away, his words echoing through the corridor behind him. Emily stood in the doorway of the aircraft, watching silently. She didn't know it yet, but her kindness had just opened a new door in her own life, one Marcus planned to leave open for her. Outside, Alan caught up with him near the terminal. Marcus, I have to say, that was one hell of a statement. Marcus's face softened slightly. It wasn't a statement. Alan, it was accountability. Alan nodded slowly. You know, this will be on every network by tonight. Marcus smiled faintly. Good. Maybe it should be. As they walked toward the private exit, Marcus's phone vibrated again. A message from Natalie. Press release ready. Headline suggestion. New ownership promises. Culture of dignity. Approve. He typed one simple word. Approved. Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked through the glass wall of the terminal. Outside, the Transaero logo gleamed faintly under the morning sun. For the first time, it looked honest. He turned to Alan. Let's start rebuilding something worth flying. Alan nodded. We will. Marcus's voice lowered. And we'll start by remembering why we do it for people. The two men walked on in silence. Behind them, the plane sat still, waiting for its next flight, its next story. But everyone who had been on Flight 407 would remember this one. Not for the turbulence, not for the landing, But for the moment when power finally took its rightful seat, the news broke before Marcus even reached his car. By the time he stepped through the private exit of London Heathrow, the story had already exploded across social media. A few blurry photos taken by passengers showed a black man in a gray suit standing calmly in the aisle while uniformed officers escorted two flight attendants off a plane. The caption underneath read, "CEO removes airline staff after being kicked from his own seat." The truth hadn't caught up yet, but the world had already taken sides. Outside, the morning had turned gray. The smell of rain lingered in the air. Marcus's driver held open the door of a sleek black sedan, but he paused before getting in. Cameras flashed from a distance. Voices called out questions that blurred together. "Dr. Reed, was this discrimination? Is it true you fired them on the spot? What will happen to TransAero employees now?" He didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply looked ahead, eyes steady, jaw relaxed. Silence, he knew, had more gravity than explanation. When the car door closed behind him, the world outside became a distant hum. The leather interior smelled faintly of cedar and new upholstery. Marcus loosened his tie and looked out the window as the city passed by in flashes of light and fog. Across from him, Alan Briggs sat stiffly, still processing the whirlwind of the last few hours. He rubbed his temples, exhaling. "Marcus, this is historic." You realize that Marcus gave a small nod. "It's overdue." Alan shifted uncomfortably. "The press is spinning this as a revenge story. They'll say you came for blood." Marcus turned his gaze from the window. His voice was calm, measured. "Let them talk. The truth isn't revenge. It's reflection." Alan studied him. "You planned this, didn't you? You could have bought TransAero months ago, but you waited. I waited for them to show me what I was buying." Marcus said quietly, "Now I know." The car fell silent. London drifted by brick buildings wet from rain, gray skies stretching endlessly overhead. Inside the car, Marcus's phone buzzed again, a new message from Natalie Brooks, media frenzy, CNN, BBC, Reuters, everyone's calling. "What's the official response?" Marcus typed slowly. "Let them see it first. No statements yet." He slipped the phone back into his jacket. The hum of the tires on wet pavement filled the space between words. Alan cleared his throat. "You know, those people you dismissed, their union is going to fight this hard." Marcus's eyes softened slightly. "They can fight. That's their right. But this isn't about two employees. Alan, it's about what their actions represented. The company has to change from the inside out, or it'll crash under the weight of its own arrogance." Alan leaned back, nodding faintly. "You sound like you've been waiting to say that for years." "I have," Marcus said. The car turned onto a quiet avenue near TransAero's London headquarters. A row of glass buildings rose like frozen waves. The Helix Dynamics logo had already been added beside TransAero's on the digital display outside. The merger was complete. As they stepped into the lobby, employees whispered, eyes following Marcus as he walked past. Some recognized him from business magazines. Others had seen his face on their phone screens just minutes ago. He wasn't angry. He wasn't triumphant. He simply carried a stillness that made everyone else pause. Inside the boardroom, a dozen executives stood waiting. Some looked nervous. Others simply looked curious. Marcus took a seat at the head of the long table. Alan sat beside him, shoulders tense. "Let's begin," Marcus said. His tone was calm but final, As of this morning, Helix Dynamics holds control and interest in Trans Aero Group. I'm not here to humiliate anyone. I'm here to fix what's broken. A few executives exchanged uncertain glances. One of them, a woman in a navy suit, raised her hand. Dr. Reed, with respect, this airline has operated under the same structure for over 20 years. Change like this doesn't happen overnight. Marcus nodded. You're right, but it can start overnight. It started 6 hours ago. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes clear and unblinking. The way your employees treat people defines your company more than any advertisement ever will. You can't build an empire on exclusion and call it excellence. The room was silent. No one dared interrupt. He continued. Starting today, every senior manager and crew member will undergo equity and empathy training. We'll create an internal unit focused solely on passenger dignity and workplace respect. And that unit will be led by someone who understands what it feels like to be unseen. Alan frowned slightly. Do you already have someone in mind? Marcus smiled faintly. I do. A flight attendant named Emily Nguyen. She'll receive an offer this afternoon. A murmur spread through the room. Some seemed surprised. Others looked uneasy. Alan leaned closer. You're promoting a junior employee to leadership. Yes, Marcus said simply, because she acted with integrity when others didn't. That's the culture I want, leading this company. The woman in the navy suit nodded slowly. That's bold. Marcus's smile was soft but unshakable. It's necessary. That evening, Marcus returned to his hotel overlooking the Thames. The city lights shimmered against the dark water. The noise of London felt distant, almost muted. He sat by the window, a glass of water untouched beside him. On the table lay his phone, buzzing every few minutes with calls from journalists, analysts, and friends. He ignored most of them. The story had grown larger than he'd imagined. Some headlines praised him, CEO turns prejudice into power. Others condemned him, corporate tyranny in the skies. But none of it mattered. Not yet. He picked up the phone and opened a new message from Natalie. Stocks up 12%. Investors are calling it a moral masterstroke. Marcus exhaled softly. Moral masterstroke, he repeated under his breath. If only they knew. He turned the screen off and looked out over the city. In the reflection, he saw not power, not triumph, but something deeper. A quiet sadness, a weariness that came from carrying too many battles in silence. He whispered to himself. Power is never the point. It's what you do with it that matters. The city lights blinked below like scattered constellations. He closed his eyes and remembered his mother's voice again. When they push you down, don't just stand back up. Build the floor higher so no one else has to fall. He finally understood what she meant. Tomorrow, the world would talk about what he did. They'd call it dramatic, righteous, excessive. But years from now, someone would board a Transaero flight and be treated like a person, not a profile. That was the legacy he wanted. He opened his eyes again. The rain had started. Drops slid slowly down the window, catching the glow of the city below. He reached for his phone and typed one last message to Natalie before setting it face down on the table. Tomorrow, announce the new Passenger Dignity Office. Make it real. Then he turned off the lights. The room went dark except for the faint glow from the skyline outside. He sat there in the silence, letting the weight of the day settle. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He had seen the system bend, and he knew it could bend again. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly over the river. The storm had passed, but the sky still remembered. Marcus smiled to himself. Sometimes the calm after the storm isn't silence, it's change, and this time the world was finally listening. The next morning began with light rain tapping against the tall windows of Marcus's suite. London was gray, soft, half awake. The hum of the city below was distant, muffled by the steady rhythm of the rain. Dr. Marcus Reed sat at a small table near the window, a cup of black coffee cooling beside his laptop. He had not slept much. The world had moved faster than even he had anticipated. His face was calm, but his eyes carried the heaviness of someone who had seen both victory and cost. Power always came with a price, and today he would find out what his was. He opened the news feed. Every major network had the story. CNN, black CEO removed from VIP seat. Turns out he owns the airline. BBC Helix Dynamics completes shock takeover of Trans-Aero. Amid onboard controversy, Financial Times, corporate morality, or power move the world reacts to Marcus Reed. He scrolled through the headlines, unreadable. He knew the world loved its heroes as much as it loved to tear them apart. He wasn't interested in either role. His phone buzzed again. It was Natalie Brooks calling from New York. He answered. "Morning. Natalie, you've started a fire." "Marcus," she said. Her voice carried that mix of pride and concern only she could balance. "Every outlet is talking about it. The board wants to know what you're going to say." "I'm not going to say anything. You can't stay silent forever." He looked out the window, watching a plane lift through the clouds in the distance. "I can for now. Sometimes silence is louder than outrage." Natalie sighed softly. "You realize this could change how every corporation in America looks at diversity, at leadership, at accountability. You've become the story. I never wanted to be the story," Marcus said. "I wanted to change who gets to ride it." There was a long pause on the line. Then Natalie said quietly, "The Trans-Aero board is requesting a video call in 1 hour. They want to discuss next steps in public messaging." Marcus smiled faintly. "Then let's give them something worth remembering." An hour later, the call began. The faces of Trans-Aero's board members appeared in small squares across the screen. Executives from London, New York, and Zurich. Some looked polite, others defensive. Marcus sat still in front of the camera, posture straight, voice calm, the kind of presence that filled the room even through a screen. Alan Briggs joined the call from his office. His tone was formal. "Ladies and gentlemen, as you know, Helix Dynamics now holds controlling interest in Trans-Aero. Dr. Reed will be addressing the board regarding the recent incident and future direction." Marcus nodded once and began, "Good morning. I know the last 24 hours have been intense. I didn't intend to make headlines. I intended to make a point." He paused, letting the silence stretch just enough for their attention to sharpen. What happened on Flight 407 wasn't a scandal. It was a mirror. It showed us who we are when no one is watching. And if we don't like what we saw, then it's time to change the reflection. One of the board members, a man named Robert Haynes, leaned forward. "With respect, Dr. Reed, the public sees this as a humiliation for Trans-Aero." "Our brand reputation," Marcus interrupted softly. "Your brand reputation is built on how you treat people. That didn't start yesterday. It just finally got filmed." Robert hesitated, then sat back in silence. Marcus continued, his voice steady. I didn't fire those employees because I was angry. I did it because every system has to be reminded of its humanity. We can't claim excellence while allowing prejudice to sit in the first row. A woman named Clara Shaw, head of communications, spoke up. You understand, this will become a precedent. Every crew member, every manager will now think twice before making a judgment call. Good, Marcus said. Maybe that's the beginning of respect. Alan looked at him, then at the rest of the board. Dr. Reed has approved the creation of a passenger dignity office, to be led by Emily Nguyen, the flight attendant who displayed empathy during the incident. The board murmured in surprise. Clara frowned. She's young. Does she even have management experience? Marcus replied without hesitation. She has the one qualification that matters: integrity. The rest can be taught. Another voice broke in from the Zurich office. And what about corporate messaging? Investors want a statement that's less emotional, more strategic. Marcus leaned slightly closer to the camera. His tone didn't rise, but it grew sharper. Empathy isn't emotional, it's strategic. The world is tired of companies pretending to care. We're going to show them what it looks like when one actually does. No one spoke after that. He continued. Transaero's new motto will be simple: every seat, every soul. No more tears of dignity, no more excuses. We'll rebuild trust, not through press releases, but through people. Alan's expression softened. He looked proud, almost relieved. That's powerful, Marcus. Marcus nodded. Powerful isn't the goal, honest is. The room fell silent again. Then, slowly, one by one, the board members nodded. Robert finally said, You have our support. Clara sighed quietly. Then I'll draft the internal memo. This will make waves. It's supposed to, Marcus said. After the call ended, Marcus sat still for a moment. The silence in the room felt heavy but peaceful. He looked at his reflection in the dark laptop screen, a man who had just changed the course of an entire company with nothing but truth and composure. He thought of Emily again, the quiet courage in her eyes as she stood in the galley. He picked up his phone and sent a message to HR. Prepare an official offer letter for Emily Nguyen, Senior Director, Passenger Dignity Office, effective immediately. Then he sent another message to Natalie. We start culture orientation Monday. Everyone attends, including executives. Her reply came back instantly. Already scheduled, and Marcus, proud of you. He smiled faintly. Pride isn't the goal either, he said softly to himself. He stood and walked toward the window. The rain had stopped, and a weak sunlight struggled through the clouds. A few birds flew low over the river, their wings glinting in the pale light. Somewhere out there, people were still debating his motives, arguing in comment sections, dissecting his words. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what came next. For Marcus, this wasn't just about an airline. It was about possibility. If a single act of dignity could ripple through an entire system, then maybe people would start demanding the same from every company, every institution, every leader. He took a sip of his now cold coffee, grimaced slightly, and smiled. Even cold, it still did the job. The intercom in the suite buzzed. Dr. Reed, your car is ready, sir. He glanced at his watch. Thank you. I'll be right down. As he gathered his briefcase, he looked once more at the view of London gray, chaotic, alive. He thought of his father again, the man who once told him that true strength doesn't come from fighting back, but from standing so firm that the world has to adjust around you. He whispered softly, "You were right, Dad." Then he walked toward the door. Outside, as he stepped into the waiting car, his driver asked, "Back to headquarters." Sir Marcus shook his head. "No, Heathrow first." The driver glanced at him in the mirror. "Back to the airport." Marcus nodded. "Yes, there's someone I'd like to see." The car pulled away from the curb, merging into the flow of London traffic. As the city blurred past, Marcus felt something new in his chest. Not anger, not triumph, but peace. The kind of peace that comes when a storm finally gives way to sky. The road to Heathrow Airport shimmered beneath a soft drizzle. The morning light broke through the clouds, painting the highway in streaks of gold and silver. Inside the car, Dr. Marcus Reed sat in silence, the hum of the engine a steady rhythm beneath his thoughts. He didn't come for business this time. He came to close a circle. As the sedan glided through the busy drop-off lane, Marcus's driver turned toward him. "Do you want me to wait here?" Sir Marcus nodded slightly. "Yes, I won't be long." The automatic doors of Terminal 5 opened with a soft hiss, letting in the hum of conversations, rolling suitcases, and distant announcements echoing from overhead speakers. The world was already moving on, unaware that history had just unfolded here less than 24 hours ago. Marcus walked through the terminal quietly. No entourage, no cameras, no noise, just a man moving through the current of travelers. He found her near a small cafe tucked beside a bookstore, Emily Nguyen, the flight attendant from Flight 407. She was dressed in civilian clothes, now a simple blue coat, her hair loosely tied back, a look of quiet exhaustion on her face. She looked up from her coffee when he approached. For a moment, she froze. Then she stood, startled. "Dr. Reed, two didn't expect to see you." Marcus smiled gently. "I know. I thought I owed you a conversation." She hesitated, then gestured toward the seat across from her. "Please, sit." He took the seat, folding his hands on the table. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The sounds of the cafe filled the space milk steaming, pages turning, someone laughing at a table nearby. Marcus broke the silence first. "You handled yourself well on that flight." Emily looked down, her voice quiet. "I didn't do much, sir. I just tried to be kind." "You did enough," Marcus said softly. "When people around you looked away, you didn't. That matters." She met his gaze, unsure whether to smile or cry. "After everything that happened, the others won't even look me in the eye. They think I betrayed the crew." Marcus leaned back slightly. "Sometimes doing the right thing isolates you, but it's also what makes you ready for what's next." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" Marcus pulled out an envelope and placed it on the table. "That's your new assignment." Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Her eyes widened as she read the letterhead Helix Dynamics, Trans-Aero Group, Office of Passenger Dignity. She looked up, stunned. "Director, this can't be right." "It's right," Marcus said, smiling faintly. "You'll lead a team that ensures every passenger, every crew member is treated with respect. You'll shape training programs, policies, and communications. You'll have real power to change things." Her voice caught. "But I'm not qualified for this. I'm just a person who did the right thing when it mattered." Marcus interrupted gently. That's exactly the qualification I'm looking for." She was quiet for a moment, then tears began to form in her eyes. "I thought I ruined my career. I didn't even know if I wanted to go back." Marcus's expression softened. "Sometimes the thing that feels like the end is just a door opening somewhere else." She nodded slowly, swallowing hard. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," Marcus said. "Thank yourself. You earned this." They sat in silence for a while. The noise of travelers moved like a tide around them. But at that table, time slowed. Emily looked at him again, studying the man who had quietly changed the course of her life. "Can I ask you something personal?" Marcus nodded. "Of course." She hesitated. "When they treated you like that on the plane, when they humiliated you, how did you stay so calm?" He smiled faintly, a sadness flickering in his eyes. "Because I learned a long time ago that anger burns fast, but strategy burns forever. I've seen what happens when people like me react. The world calls it aggression. But when we plan, when we act with precision, they call it leadership." She absorbed his words, her eyes glistening. Marcus continued, his voice low. "I've spent years being underestimated. It's exhausting, but it's also a gift. Because when people assume you have no power, they never see the moment you use it." Emily nodded slowly. "You didn't just win, did you?" Marcus tilted his head. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "You changed the game." Marcus chuckled softly. "Maybe, or maybe I just reminded them it was never theirs to begin with." A long moment passed. Then Marcus stood, leaving a business card on the table. "Call me when you're ready to start. I'll have Natalie set you up with a team." Emily stood as well, still holding the envelope tightly. "I will. I promise." Marcus gave her a gentle nod and started to leave. But before he walked away, Emily called after him, "Dr. Reed." He turned. She hesitated, then said, "You didn't just change a company, you changed people like me?" Marcus's eyes softened. "Good. That means it worked." He gave her a small, knowing smile, then disappeared into the flow of the crowd. Back in the car, Marcus leaned his head against the seat and closed his eyes. The rain had stopped, and sunlight poured through the windows, warm and golden. Alan Briggs called just as the car pulled away. "Marcus, I just got the memo. Emily's appointment went public 20 minutes ago. The media's calling it revolutionary." Marcus smiled faintly. "Revolutionary is just the right thing that took too long." Alan laughed quietly. "You know, this company's never seen leadership like yours." "Then let's make sure they never forget it," Marcus replied. As the car merged onto the motorway, he looked out at the sky, vast, open, streaked with white clouds that glowed against the sun. For the first time in a long time, he felt something close to peace. Not triumph, not revenge, just the quiet satisfaction of balance restored. He thought again of what his mother used to tell him when he was a boy. When the world shows you its worst, show it your best. And if it still doesn't listen, show it results. He smiled at the memory. Behind him, the city stretched away, humming with life. Ahead, a horizon waiting to be rewritten. The plane that had once been his humiliation was now the symbol of his victory, not the loud, vengeful kind, but the steady, transformative one that reshapes everything it touches. He closed his eyes and whispered, "It's not about the seat. It's about who you become when they take it away." Outside, the clouds drifted apart, revealing a bright, unbroken sky. For Marcus Reed, the storm was over. But his sky, had only just begun. The morning air in London carried the faint chill of early spring. The streets around Transaero headquarters glistened from the night's rain, and sunlight was beginning to break through the mist. The building itself, a tower of glass and steel, looked the same as always, but inside, something had changed. Something small. Something powerful. Emily Nguyen stood in front of the entrance, clutching her new ID badge. The silver letters gleamed, Director, Passenger Dignity Office. She took a deep breath before stepping through the revolving door. People moved quickly in the lobby suits, briefcases, polished shoes clicking against marble. For a moment, she felt out of place. Just a few days ago, she'd been walking these halls in uniform, a name tag pinned to her chest, a practiced smile masking exhaustion. Now, she carried a title that made people stop and stare. At the reception desk, the young clerk smiled nervously. "Good morning, Ms. Nguyen. Welcome back. The executive floor is waiting for you." Emily returned the smile. "Thank you. And it's just Emily." The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Her reflection in the mirrored wall looked calm, but her heart was pounding. She remembered Marcus's words at the cafe. Sometimes doing the right thing isolates you, but it's also what makes you ready for what's next. When the doors opened, Alan Briggs was waiting. He greeted her warmly. "Emily, you made it. I still can't believe any of this is real," she admitted. Alan chuckled. "Neither can some of the board members. But Marcus doesn't do anything halfway." He led her down a bright corridor. The air smelled faintly of cedar and fresh paint, the result of Marcus's immediate renovations. Along the walls hung new posters displaying the airline's rebranded message, "Every seat, every soul." Alan gestured to a glass-walled office overlooking the runway. "This is yours." Emily stepped inside. The desk was simple, the view magnificent. Planes lifted into the sky one after another, symbols of movement, progress, and second chances. She felt her chest tighten. For the first time, she believed she was exactly where she was supposed to be. Alan handed her a folder. "Here's your team list. Marcus wants you to start with empathy training modules for the entire staff cabin crew first. He's personally approved the budget." She flipped through the papers. Her name was printed beside Marcus's in the project charter, co-authored by Dr. Marcus Reed and Emily Nguyen. Her eyes widened. "He put my name next to his." Alan smiled. "That's how he operates. Partnership over hierarchy." Emily nodded, overwhelmed. "Thank you, Alan." He shook her hand. "No, thank him. He'll be here later this afternoon." Hours passed in a blur. Emily met with department heads, listened to stories, and took notes. Some welcomed her ideas. Others were polite but cautious. A few didn't hide their skepticism. One manager leaned back in his chair during the meeting and said, "Look, Ms. Nguyen, I respect what happened on that flight, but we can't run an airline on emotions. This is business." Emily looked at him steadily. "So is respect. And if we treat it like an option, we'll lose both the people and the business." The room went quiet. Someone finally nodded. "She's right," another voice murmured. By late afternoon, Emily was exhausted but inspired. She stepped into her office to find a small note on her desk. The handwriting was elegant and unmistakable. "Proud of you already. I'm on my way. Ma-R." Her heart lifted. 30 minutes later. Dr. Marcus Reed entered the office floor. The atmosphere shifted the moment he arrived. People straightened, lowered their voices, and stole quick glances, not because of fear, but because of gravity. Marcus carried the kind of quiet authority that commanded attention without asking for it. He stepped into Emily's office and smiled. "How's my new director holding up?" Emily laughed softly, trying not to faint. "Mostly." "You're doing fine," he said. "I've been watching the live reports from the press downstairs. They're calling this the empathy experiment." "That's not terrible," she said. Marcus chuckled. "In this world, that's a compliment." He looked out the window at the planes rolling down the runway. "When I was your age, I thought leadership meant control. It took me years to learn that real leadership means surrender. You don't build culture by forcing people to care. You do it by showing them why it matters." Emily nodded slowly. "You've given me a big responsibility." "I know," he said. "That's why I gave it to you." He turned to her. "Do you remember that man on the flight? Gregory Vance?" Her face darkened slightly. "Yes, the one they gave your seat to." Marcus's tone softened. "He sent an email this morning. He apologized." She blinked. "Really?" He nodded. "He said he didn't know who I was. That's the point. He shouldn't have needed to." Emily exhaled slowly. "That's powerful." Marcus smiled. "Change always ripples further than you think, even when you can't see it yet." He handed her another envelope. "This is for you." Inside was a handwritten note on Helix stationery. "When the system forgets its humanity, remind it, when the world looks away, see, Em?" Emily looked up, her eyes shimmering. "You write better than most poets." He smiled. "Comes with age and too many nights alone with coffee." They both laughed. Marcus's expression grew thoughtful again. "You'll face resistance, Emily. Not everyone is ready for change, but don't fight them. Listen first. Understand. That's how empathy becomes structure." "I'll try," she said quietly. "Don't try," Marcus replied. "Do." He gave her a nod and turned to leave, but before stepping out, he paused at the door. "You know what the best part is?" Emily shook her head. Marcus's voice softened. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for being where you belong." She smiled. "I'll remember that." He left the office, his reflection vanishing into the glass walls. That evening, Emily walked alone through the terminal. The day had ended, but her mind was still buzzing. She stopped by a window overlooking the tarmac, watching the lights of planes take off against the darkening sky. She thought about how strange it was how life could shift in a single day. One act of courage, one moment of truth, and everything changed. Not just for her, but for everyone who would board those planes in the future. Her phone buzzed with a new email. It was from Marcus. "Tomorrow, I want you to speak at the internal launch. Tell them why this matters, not from policy, from the heart." She typed a short reply. "I will." As she sent the message, her reflection glowed faintly against the glass. For the first time, she didn't see the girl in the uniform who smiled because she had to. She saw a woman standing tall, shaping something new, something lasting. Outside, the runway lights stretched endlessly, like veins of light leading into the unknown. A plane rose into the night sky, its engines roaring softly. Emily followed it with her eyes until it disappeared into the clouds, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small under the sky. She felt part of it. She whispered to herself, every seat, every soul, and in that moment, it wasn't just a slogan, it was a promise. The next morning dawned bright and cold. The sky over London Heathrow was clear, almost impossibly blue, as if the weather itself had decided to start over. Inside the Trans-Aero headquarters, a quiet energy buzzed through the hallways. Employees gathered in the atrium, hundreds of them cabin crew, ground staff, engineers, executives. The air was filled with whispers, the occasional flash of a phone camera, and a sense of anticipation that none of them could quite name. At the center of the crowd stood a small stage framed by the airline's new banner, "Every seat, every soul." The words shimmered in silver letters under the lights, behind the curtain. Emily Nguyen adjusted the microphone headset, her hands trembling slightly. Her heart was racing. She had spoken in front of passengers before, given safety demonstrations hundreds of times, but this was different. This wasn't about oxygen masks or exits. This was about truth. She looked to the side, where Dr. Marcus Reed stood watching her with calm confidence. He gave her a small nod. "You ready?" Emily took a deep breath. "Not really." He smiled gently. "Good. That means you're human." She laughed softly, then stepped toward the stage. As the curtain lifted, the room quieted. Emily walked to the podium. The microphone adjusted automatically. She looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some skeptical, some quietly supportive. For a moment, she thought her voice would fail her. Then she remembered Marcus's words from the night before. Tell them why it matters. Not from policy, from the heart. She began softly. "A week ago, I was a flight attendant. My job was to make sure passengers were safe and comfortable. I thought that was all there was to it. But then, on one flight, I learned that comfort means nothing without dignity." The audience leaned in. She continued, her voice steadying. "That day, I saw what happens when judgment replaces empathy. When we forget that behind every boarding pass, there's a person, a story, a life, a reason to be treated with respect." She paused, scanning the crowd. That flight didn't just change my career. It changed how I see people. And I think it's time it changes how we, as an airline, see people too. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Emily lifted the speech paper from the podium, then set it aside. "I wrote a speech," she said with a small smile. "But this isn't a speech. This is a promise." Her voice grew stronger now. "No one should ever feel unseen when they fly with us. No one should ever have to wonder if kindness depends on their appearance, their accent, or the color of their skin. We can do better, and starting today, we will." There was a silence so deep that even the air felt still. Then she added, "When I first heard Dr. Reed talk about this new office, the Passenger Dignity Office, I thought it was just a slogan. But then I realized something. He's not trying to fix an airline. He's trying to fix how we see each other." At that moment, the camera lights flashed, reporters scribbled notes, even the most cynical executives looked up from their phones. Marcus stood at the back of the room, his hands clasped loosely, his expression calm but proud. Emily's eyes found him. "He gave me this job because I made one small choice. I didn't look away. I didn't let fear or convenience stop me from doing what was right. If one person can make a difference, imagine what 1,000 of us can do." Her voice softened. "This isn't about guilt. It's about grace. It's about giving each other the chance to be better than we were yesterday." She stepped away from the podium, her tone becoming more intimate. "I want to tell you something Dr. Reed told me. He said, you don't build a culture by forcing people to care. You do it by showing them why it matters. And today, I think we all understand why it matters." Applause began hesitant at first, then growing. The sound filled the atrium, echoing up to the glass ceiling. Marcus nodded slightly, then stepped forward. The crowd quieted again. He took the microphone from Emily and looked around the room. "I told Emily this moment wasn't about me," he said. "But I realize now, it's not about her either. It's about all of us, about who we decide to be when no one's watching." He gestured toward the slogan behind him. "Every seat, every soul." It's more than a phrase. It's our compass. It means we see people before we see positions. We value decency before dollars. The audience listened, completely still. Marcus's voice lowered. "I've been on flights where people made me feel invisible. I've also been on flights where strangers reminded me I mattered. One moment can change a life. I know, because it changed mine." He turned toward Emily, smiling. "That's why I chose her to lead this movement, because she understood that compassion isn't weakness, it's courage." The applause started again, louder this time. Some of the staff even stood. Marcus looked back at the crowd. "I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be present, to care, to see, to listen, because every single person who steps onto our planes carries something invisible, hopes, fears, memories. We don't just carry passengers, we carry lives." He paused, letting the silence hold. Then he said simply, "Let's make sure we carry them well." The room erupted. Cheers, applause, even a few tears. Cameras flashed like lightning. Emily stood beside Marcus, her hands shaking slightly, her heart full. She had never felt anything like it. Not fame, not recognition, but something purer. The feeling that she was part of something right. When the noise finally faded, Marcus leaned toward her and whispered, "You did good." She smiled through tears. "We did." That night, videos of the speech flooded social media. Millions watched. People shared clips with captions like, "This is leadership," "Compassion is power," and "Every seat, every soul the airline we need." Even critics admitted it was one of the most moving corporate speeches they had ever seen. News anchors debated it. Late-night hosts quoted it. And somewhere in a quiet suburban home, a retired teacher named Elaine Reed watched her son's face on TV and whispered, "That's my boy." Meanwhile, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room, the city lights flickering outside. He scrolled through the videos, Emily's words, his own, and felt something rare peace. It wasn't the kind that came from victory. It was the kind that came from alignment. For once, his actions, his purpose, and his heart were all moving in the same direction. He turned off the phone, leaned back in his chair, and looked at the skyline. London shimmered under the night sky, alive and vast. He whispered to himself, one flight, one voice, one ripple, and somewhere out there, across oceans and time zones, the ripple was already spreading through boardrooms, break rooms, and hearts, a small revolution of kindness disguised as an airline policy. The day after the speech, the world didn't just react, it roared. By sunrise, the phrase, "every seat, every soul" had become a global headline. It trended across every platform, From business networks to morning shows, the clip of Emily Nguyen standing on stage, her voice trembling but fierce, had been viewed over 50 million times in less than 12 hours. News anchors called it a turning point in corporate culture. Business analysts called it a masterclass in leadership optics. But the people, the passengers, the workers, the quiet observers, they called it something simpler. Hope. Across airports from Atlanta to Amsterdam, Trans-Aero staff printed the new motto on their badges. Cabin crews shared posts saying, "Proud to fly for something that matters." It wasn't policy anymore. It was a pulse. Yet, not everyone was celebrating. Inside a boardroom in New York, a group of corporate executives from a rival airline sat in silence, watching the viral clip. Their CEO, a man named Richard Hale, finally broke the tension. "He's not running an airline," he muttered. "He's building a religion." One of his advisors spoke cautiously. "Public sentiment is overwhelmingly in their favor. If this continues, they'll dominate the market." Hale leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "Then we'll remind people that sentiment doesn't fly planes. Logistics do. Let's see how moral philosophy holds up when the next delay hits." Meanwhile, back in London, Marcus sat in a quiet meeting room overlooking the river. The city glowed under a soft golden haze. On the table before him were stacks of reports, financial forecasts, social analytics, public sentiment indexes, but his eyes weren't on the numbers. They were on the screen across from him, replaying Emily's speech. He watched her words again, not as a CEO, but as a man who once dreamed of changing the system from within. She had carried his vision beyond anything he could have scripted. He smiled faintly, whispering. She made it hers. The door opened softly. Natalie Brooks entered, holding a tablet. "Marcus, the stock's up 21%. Media coverage is positive, but we're also seeing backlash." He turned to her, from where some conservative outlets, they're calling it performative morality. Others are questioning whether we fired the crew too harshly. Marcus nodded slowly. That was inevitable. Natalie hesitated. "Do you want to issue a statement?" He shook his head. "No, let them debate. Every revolution sounds unreasonable until it becomes standard." She smiled. "You always did have a talent for patience?" "Not patience," he said softly. "Perspective." Natalie took a seat. "You realize you've turned this company into a social movement?" Marcus leaned back, thoughtful. "If dignity feels like a movement, that tells us how far behind we've been." For a moment, they sat in silence, watching the river shimmer through the glass. Then Natalie said quietly, "You should rest. The media wants you on every show. Everyone wants your face on their headline." Marcus smiled faintly. "The message is already out there. My face doesn't need to be." That afternoon, he took a walk through the airport alone. No security detail, no cameras, no entourage, just a man in a dark coat moving through a place that had once humiliated him. He passed a family boarding a flight, a father helping his daughter lift her pink suitcase, a mother smiling as she adjusted her son's jacket. Small moments of care, unnoticed by most, but to Marcus, they were everything. At a nearby gate, he overheard a flight attendant greet a passenger with warmth in her voice. "Welcome aboard, sir. It's good to have you with us." The passenger smiled back, polite, relaxed, nothing extraordinary, except that she meant it. Marcus stopped for a moment, watching. He didn't interrupt. He didn't introduce himself. He just let the sight sink in, change happening quietly, naturally, where it mattered most. He took a deep breath, feeling something inside him ease. The anger he once carried, sharp, righteous, heavy, was softening into something else. Resolve. Grace. As he turned to leave, a young man approached hesitantly. "Excuse me," he said, eyes wide. "You're Dr. Reed?" "Right." Marcus nodded. The man's voice shook. "I just wanted to say what you did. It meant a lot to my dad. He's been a pilot for 20 years. He said it's the first time he's felt proud to wear the uniform again." Marcus smiled warmly. "Tell him it means a lot to me, too." The man hesitated, then added, "My dad's black. He said you made him feel seen." For a moment, Marcus couldn't speak. He simply nodded. "Then that's worth everything." The young man smiled, then disappeared into the crowd. Marcus stood there a while longer, watching the planes ascend into the sky, each one carrying hundreds of lives, each one a tiny universe of stories. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was fighting gravity. He felt like he was part of the lift. Later that evening, he joined Natalie and Alan in a private conference call with the Trans-Aero U.S. Division. The faces on the screen looked anxious but inspired. Alan began, "We're expanding the passenger dignity program across all regions. Training starts next month. Emily's team is already developing the framework." One manager from Chicago spoke up, "Dr. Reed, there's a lot of talk among staff. Some are saying this is more than a program, it's a culture shift. It's changing how we talk to people." Marcus nodded. "That's the goal." The manager smiled nervously. "It's working. Yesterday, one of our gate agents helped an elderly couple through security. They said it was the first time they'd felt treated like family by an airline. They mentioned your name." Marcus's eyes softened. "Don't mention mine. Mention hers, who's Emily Nguyen." Marcus said, "She's the heartbeat of this movement. I'm just the echo." Natalie smiled quietly at that. "You always did like giving credit away, because it multiplies when you do," he replied. Alan leaned forward. "There's talk of awards, interviews, invitations to global panels. You could turn this into a brand empire." Marcus shook his head. "No, I don't want an empire. I want a mirror, one that reflects what we can be." The screen went quiet again. The faces looking back at him weren't just employees anymore. They were believers. That night, long after the meetings ended, Marcus sat by his window again, the Thames glimmering below. He sipped black tea and scrolled through a message that had just arrived from Elaine Reed, his mother. "Proud of you, son. The boy who once got sent home for speaking up is now teaching the world to listen." Marcus smiled, a soft ache in his chest. He typed back, "You taught me how to speak softly and still be heard." He set the phone down and looked out over the city. The world was still loud, still messy, still divided, but in the middle of that noise, he had found a kind of music, the sound of progress, slow but steady, human but unstoppable. He whispered into the quiet. They said one man couldn't change the system. They were right. It takes everyone. Outside, a plane roared into the sky, lights cutting through the darkness. Marcus followed it with his eyes, a faint smile forming as it vanished into the clouds. The storm had passed, but the echo was just beginning. 1 year later, The sky over New York City burned gold as the sun dipped behind the skyline. From the floor-to-ceiling windows of Helix Dynamics Tower, the world below looked like a mosaic of light, endless, alive, in motion. Inside the boardroom, a quiet hum of conversation filled the space. Executives from across continents were seated around a long oak table. Screens glowed with flight data, customer feedback, and images from airports across the globe. At the head of the table sat Dr. Marcus Reed. His expression was calm, thoughtful, the same steady presence that had guided this company through chaos into clarity. But today, something in his eyes carried a rare lightness, not triumph, not pride, but peace. Natalie Brooks spoke first. Global passenger satisfaction is at an all-time high. Transaero's Net Promoter Score has doubled, and the empathy initiative you launched is now being replicated by 6 other airlines. A ripple of quiet approval moved through the room. Alan Briggs smiled from across the table. The funny thing is, they all said you were too idealistic. Now they're copying your playbook. Marcus leaned back slightly, smiling faintly. Idealism is just realism that hasn't been tested yet. Laughter rippled softly through the room. Natalie clicked her tablet, changing the slide. There's one more update you should see. The screen filled with a photo Emily and Nguyen standing on a stage in Geneva, speaking at the Global Aviation Forum. Behind her, the banner read, "From Policy to Humanity, the Future of Travel." Marcus's expression softened. How did she do? She was brilliant, Natalie said. She spoke about compassion like it was infrastructure. The crowd gave her a standing ovation. Alan added, "They're calling her the conscience of the skies." Marcus looked at the image for a long moment. She always was. He stood slowly, walking toward the window. The city shimmered below. We built this to change an airline. She turned it into a movement. Natalie watched him carefully. You sound like a man thinking about what comes next. He smiled. Maybe I am. Later that evening, Marcus walked through the streets of Manhattan. The air smelled like rain and roasted chestnuts from a nearby cart. People passed by, faces lit by neon and phone screens, each moving through their own invisible stories. He stopped near a bus stop where a digital billboard displayed an advertisement for Transaero. It wasn't flashy, just a simple image, a flight attendant helping an elderly woman with her bag. The tagline read, "Every seat, every soul." He smiled quietly. It was no longer his campaign. It was everyone's. A soft voice behind him said, "Excuse me, are you Dr. Reed?" He turned. A young woman, maybe 25, stood holding a travel bag. Her expression was shy but earnest. "I just wanted to thank you. I joined Transaero last year after the program started. I'm a gate agent at JFK. It's the first job where I feel like what I do actually matters." Marcus's tone was warm. It always mattered. The world's just catching up. She smiled, eyes bright. "My dad used to say, people don't change, but you proved they can." He nodded. "People change when they're seen." The woman hesitated. "Do you ever get tired of being the guy who changed everything?" Marcus chuckled softly. "Every day, but it's the best kind of tired." She laughed, thanked him again, and disappeared into the crowd. Marcus stood there a while longer, watching the reflection of the city lights shimmer across the puddled sidewalk. Then he turned toward the park, phone buzzing gently in his pocket, a message from Emily Nguyen. Just landed in Geneva, headed to dinner with UN delegates. They want to expand the dignity model to ground operations worldwide. Thank you for believing in me." He smiled as he typed back. "Belief was easy. You made it real." He paused, then added one more line. "Fly high, Director Nguyen. The world's listening." He slipped the phone away and kept walking. Back in London, across the Atlantic, the passenger dignity office was alive with energy. Emily stood before her growing team, a group of people from over a dozen countries, pilots, crew members, customer service reps, even psychologists, all working together to turn empathy into structure. "All right," Emily said, her voice confident and clear. "Next quarter, we're expanding to 5 new hubs. We're launching emotional intelligence training for every manager." And yes, she grinned. "I know it sounds ambitious, but so did everything else we've done." Her team laughed, energized by her spirit. On her office wall hung a framed note from Marcus, the one he had written a year ago. "When the system forgets its humanity, remind it." Every time she looked at it, she remembered that morning in the cafe, when she thought her career was over. She had no idea that the man across from her would rewrite her life and the world's idea of what leadership looked like. In Washington, D.C., that same week, a congressional hearing convened on the future of ethical corporate policy. A senator quoted Marcus Reed's name twice during her remarks. Dr. Reed's model for inclusive accountability is not just good business, it's good citizenship. Even critics nodded in cautious agreement. Meanwhile, at Helix Dynamics, Marcus sat in his office, surrounded by soft light and quiet. Papers were neatly stacked, his schedule open but half forgotten. He looked out at the skyline again, the same one that once felt like a wall, now a window. He picked up a framed photo from his desk. It was old, worn at the edges. His younger self stood beside his mother, Elaine Reed, smiling in front of a church in Atlanta. He whispered, "You were right. Mom, we don't fix the world by shouting at it. We fix it by building something louder than hate." His phone buzzed again this time, a video message. Emily's voice came through, cheerful and genuine. "Hey, boss, just finished my talk. The UN wants to adopt the passenger dignity principles for all international airlines. They even quoted your line, 'Empathy isn't emotional, it's strategic.' Thought you'd like to know." He laughed quietly, shaking his head. "I said that to you once in a car." Her recorded voice replied, as if answering him across time, "And I wrote it down." He smiled, setting the phone aside. Outside, the last light of day faded. The city turned to gold, then blue, then silver. Marcus stood, walked to the window, and looked up. A single plane passed overhead, its lights blinking softly as it crossed the dusk sky. He whispered, "Keep flying, Emily." Later that night, Marcus closed his laptop and turned off the office lights. The world outside shimmered like a reflection on water, blurred yet beautiful. He picked up his coat and walked out quietly. The elevator descended in silence, floor by floor, until the doors opened to the lobby. A security guard nodded respectfully. "Good night, Dr. Reed." Marcus smiled. "Good night, and take care of yourself." As he stepped outside, the wind brushed against his face, cool, clean, alive. The city stretched endlessly before him, and somewhere above, another flight was climbing higher, carrying people from every background, every story, every seat, and for the first time in his long career, Marcus didn't feel like he was chasing something. He felt like he had arrived. He looked up once more, the lights of the plane flickering through the clouds. Every seat, he whispered. Every soul. Then he walked forward into the night, calm, grounded, whole. The legacy was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone who chose to see and to care. The sun was rising over Zurich, spilling gold across the snowy Alps. The light filtered through the airport windows, painting everything in warmth. The air was calm, the terminal quiet except for the rhythmic roll of suitcase wheels and the soft hum of departing flights. At gate 9A, a familiar voice greeted passengers with genuine care. "Good morning. Welcome aboard Trans-Aeroflight 407 to New York City." It was Emmeline Julian. Her uniform looked the same as it once had, but everything about her presence had changed. Her eyes carried calm confidence. Her smile was real, not trained, but lived. She wasn't working this flight for protocol. She'd chosen to. This wasn't just another trip across the Atlantic. It was something full circle. 2 gates away, a tall figure stood by the window, holding a cup of coffee. Dr. Marcus Reed had arrived early, his ticket tucked neatly inside his passport. No assistants, no cameras, no announcements, just him, quietly waiting. He was flying home to New York for the annual Helix Dynamics Global Forum, the 1-year anniversary of the passenger dignity movement. But there was another reason he'd chosen this specific flight. It was the same route where everything began. He watched the planes taxiing slowly under the morning light. The same type of aircraft, the same airline, the same gate. The irony wasn't lost on him. A year ago, he'd been told to give up his seat. Today, he had reserved that very seat again, 1A, except this time, no one would ask him to move. As the boarding call echoed through the terminal, Marcus smiled softly and walked down the jet bridge. Inside the cabin, the first-class section glowed in soft amber light. The same leather seats, but the energy was different now. Passengers chatted easily with the crew, laughter blended with the calm rhythm of boarding. When Marcus reached his seat, Emily was already there, professional but warm, her posture graceful. Their eyes met, and a quiet recognition passed between them. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Reed," she said gently. "It's good to have you back." He smiled. "Feels good to be back." She leaned closer, lowering her voice. "We saved the best seat this time." He chuckled. "Let's hope I get to keep it." "You will," she said, smiling. I checked twice. Marcus laughed quietly, then settled in. "How's Geneva beautiful?" she said. "But different. Everywhere I go, people quote you." He shook his head. "They should quote you instead." She smiled, shaking her head. "You started it. I just gave it wings." They shared a small, understanding silence. Then she excused herself to finish boarding. Marcus watched her move through the aisle, graceful, confident, respected. The crew around her looked up to her naturally. No commands, no pretense, just presence. As the plane began to taxi, Marcus looked out the window. The snowy peaks gleamed in the distance, their sharp edges softening under sunlight. The engines roared gently to life. He closed his eyes and let the hum wash over him. In his mind, he saw moments that day on the flight, the confrontation, the anger, the quiet resolve. He remembered Elaine's voice, her words about grace. He remembered Emily's trembling courage on stage, The first time she said, "every seat, every soul." It all felt distant and near at once, like a story he had written, but that now belonged to everyone else. 2 hours into the flight, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're cruising at 37,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean. Today marks 1 year since Transaero's passenger dignity program began. On behalf of our entire crew, thank you for being part of something that reminds us flying isn't just about distance, it's about connection." A soft round of applause filled the cabin. Some passengers smiled, some nodded quietly. Marcus simply looked out the window, humbled. Emily approached with a cup of tea. "Chamomile." "Right." He smiled. "You remember?" She nodded. "I remember everything about that flight." He took the cup, his reflection shimmering in the window. "You know, I didn't think I'd ever fly this route again." "Why not?" she asked. "Because I thought it would remind me of the worst in people," he said softly. "Turns out, it reminds me of the best." Emily's eyes softened. Sometimes we need to fall out of grace to see what grace really is. He looked at her, proud. "You're becoming dangerous with words." She laughed quietly. "Guess I learned from the best." For a long while, they just stood there, no words, no pretense. The sound of the engines filled the space between them, steady and alive. Marcus felt something he hadn't in a long time, stillness that didn't come from control, but from peace. Midway through the flight, Marcus pulled a small leather notebook from his briefcase. Inside were handwritten notes, ideas, and messages, fragments of what he hoped to publish one day. The title at the top of the first page read, "The Sky Between Us." He began writing slowly. Leadership isn't power. It's the privilege to make people feel safe enough to be themselves. I learned that at 37,000 feet, somewhere between who I was and who I became. He paused, glancing around the cabin families, executives, strangers, each person in their own small world, yet somehow connected by the invisible rhythm of flight. He continued writing. "We can't change the world in one grand act. We change it in how we greet, how we listen, how we see. The smallest kindness can redirect an entire story. I know, because one redirected mine." His pen hovered for a moment, then stopped. He closed the notebook and exhaled deeply. He wasn't tired, just full of everything he'd carried, and finally ready to set it down. Hours later, as the plane began its descent over New York, the skyline appeared a shimmering river of glass and light. The city that had once felt like a battleground now looked like home. Emily's voice came through the cabin, calm and steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome home, on behalf of Dr. Marcus Reed and all of us at Transaero. Thank you for flying with us. May every journey remind you of your worth." The passengers applauded lightly, unaware that the man whose name she mentioned was sitting quietly among them, smiling at her words. As the plane touched down, Marcus looked out the window and saw something unexpected. The gate they parked at had been renamed. A new sign gleamed above the terminal doors. "Reed Terminal, dedicated to dignity in flight." For a moment, Marcus couldn't breathe. His chest tightened, eyes stinging. He hadn't asked for monuments, but this was different. It wasn't about him. It was about what humanity could be when kindness became policy. Emily stood at the front as passengers disembarked. When Marcus reached her, she met his eyes and smiled softly. welcome home, Dr. Reed." He nodded. "It feels like home, Emily. It really does." She hesitated, then said quietly, "The first time we met, you were the man who changed my life. The second time, you were my boss. Now, you're my friend." He smiled warmly. "That's the promotion I'm most proud of." She laughed softly. "So what's next?" He looked around the cabin one last time, the polished seats, the quiet hum, the small symbols of change. "Next," he said, "I fly less and live more." She nodded, eyes glistening. "You've earned that." Marcus gave her one final nod and stepped off the plane. Outside, the sun was shining over New York. The air smelled like salt and steel and possibility. Marcus paused on the jet bridge, took one last look back, and smiled. He whispered to himself, "Every seat, every soul," and then he walked forward, no cameras, no headlines, no noise, just a man who had done what he came to do. The world would remember the speech, the policy, the movement, but the truth was simpler. The real legacy wasn't written in headlines, it was written in hearts. And as another plane lifted off in the distance, its shadow crossing the runway, Marcus Reed disappeared into the morning light, leaving behind not just a company, but a new way of seeing the world. Dr. Marcus Reed's story isn't just about one man on one flight, it's about all of us. It reminds us that dignity isn't something we earn through titles, wealth, or power. It's something we owe each other, simply because we share this human experience. When Marcus chose grace over rage, he didn't just protect his reputation, he reclaimed the narrative. In a world that too often rewards noise, he proved that quiet strength can shake systems. He showed that empathy isn't weakness, it's leadership in its purest form. Every person who watched that story unfold was forced to ask themselves, how would I act if no one was watching? That's the real power of his journey. It challenges us to lead with kindness, to see before we judge, and to speak up when silence feels safer. For older generations, this story is a gentle echo, a reminder of every time we were told to endure, to stay silent, to take the smaller seat. But it also gives hope that the next generation doesn't have to. Because change doesn't always start with protest. Sometimes it starts with grace under pressure. So, as we close this chapter, take a moment to reflect. Who in your life needs to be seen, heard, and treated with dignity today? You might not change the world overnight, but you can change someone's world today. Thank you for being part of this journey. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this remind us that kindness still matters, and that sometimes the quietest moments create the loudest echoes.